Hello, Kelly here with Kelly's Soroka Life and the home of the Broom and Moon Coven. So today is my last in this series of my May 4 by 4 research projects and items, magical items that I've been studying this month. So every month I have four things, magical items that I study and research for the month. And it is a crystal, an herb, a deck, and a book. So in May, I've been working with raspberry, the crystal Smoky Quartz, and the deck, the Mystic Fairy Tarot. And I've read the book that we're going to do the review on today is Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion by Jamie Waggoner. This is one of those books that I bought for something. I remember buying it. I remember thinking, "Oh, this would be good for," and I don't really remember exactly the reason that I bought it, which is it's not is pretty typical for me, is I'll buy something and I will, for some reason, not use it right at that point, and it will go on my bookshelf. And eventually, I might get to it and I might not remember exactly why I bought it. But almost every time when I buy a book and I don't read it for in that specific moment and I come back to it, then I've come back to it for a reason, and I've bought it for a reason, and it wasn't the time, but it needed to be in my collection, and it needed to be there for something that I was going to be doing later on. And so this is one of those things that I bought this book for because I was interested in the topic, and I bought the book, but for some reason moved on. And now that I am doing this practice, which I did all of 2025, and now I'm almost halfway through 2026 with this same practice of picking these four things, and one of the things is a book. So I'm not buying new books, but I'm going back to books that I have on my shelf that haven't read for some reason, and plucking it off the shelf and putting it on my list. And so at the beginning of 2025, I did the same thing. I went through, looked at several books that I knew that I hadn't read that I really wanted to read, and put them all on a list and read them at certain times during that year. And I've done the same thing this year. I went at the end of last year, went through my bookshelves, looked at books that I knew that I hadn't read, and put them on a list, and just kind of randomly put them on a list. And almost every time, a deck, a book, or a crystal or an herb that I've been working with has just been exactly what I've needed at that time, or given me some kind of message that I am very grateful for. And so the same thing with this book. And Hades is not necessarily a god that I have worked with. I grew up on Greek myths, knew most of the stories, loved, mythology, loved the stories, loved the books, and was an English major and taught in high school English for a while. And so, part of that was mythology, was learning mythologies and learning history and these stories, and how story is so important to us as people. And so I've always I learned Greek mythology and kind of Roman mythology adjacent to that. And then as I got older, I got more interested in mythologies in other cultures. And so I started reading about the gods and goddesses in other religions and mythologies. And as when I homeschooled my kids, they all loved mythology in different ways. And so that was, a big part of their education. And now that I'm at a place where I have more time to really dig into things, I've started to go deeper in a lot of things. And that's probably why I bought this book because it was very specific. It was specifically about a god that I knew the story. I knew the story of Hades. I knew the story or stories of Hades, who he is in the Greek pantheon, his story with Persephone and Demeter and the turning of the seasons. And so, I knew all of those stories, and this was a way to really look at that story in a different way. And at the same time, I was in much more in a place where I wanted to learn about the goddesses and not so much the gods anymore because, in Christianity, which I was raised in, God is just God. And, there's been no or very little to no room for women. And so now that I was out, stepping outside of the religion that I grew up in, I really wanted to learn about the divine feminine and goddesses. And so I have done a lot of work with other goddesses and not so much, the gods, but it's very important to have that balance. It's important to have the balance between the divine masculine and the divine feminine and know that there are even though we see them as opposites, they're not, I don't see them as opposites. I see them more as complementary energies that are important in life, important in my life specifically. And so I wanted to, and because I had been raised in a more patriarchal religion, I really wanted to dive into goddesses. And so I worked with a lot of the goddesses, including Persephone and Demeter and Bridget and Kali and the Morgan and some of the other and Hecate and some of the other goddesses that were either I'd never heard of or were kind of on the outskirts of kind of the mythology that is popular. And so that was I was really into that. But looking at this and thinking, Hades, this is something that is different. It's something that is, again, something that it would be very much outside of the religion that I grew up in because, to Christians, Hades is hell, is a place where you don't want to go and where work your whole life to make sure that you don't end up. But in studying mythologies and studying Greek mythology, that's not really the truth. And Hades is not it's the underworld, and so it's not this place of eternal punishment, but it's a place of rebirth and renewal and I really was interested in that and seeing how that played out because I knew that it played out in my life every season. There was a season, the moon went through cycles, the seasons came and went, and things grew and things died. And so I felt like that there was something deeper. And this book, I think, goes into that and goes into Hades and the author's personal work with Hades. And and also how we can work with Hades, even if you're not interested in working with a specific god or a specific a dedicate be a dedicant to that person, to that god. There's still a lot to learn from the story, and to learn from her personal journey and story. And she the book is broken up into chapters in which she tells a part of the story of Hades. So, like for chapter 2, this is the beginning. So, this is the story of Hades that she has gotten from her personal work with Hades. And then there is a one of his epithets, and then there is a place, and part, and talking about the different places in the mythology that is related to him, and about about the lore, about there are and then each chapter has a symbol of Hades, and then two plants or herbs that Hades is correspondences of Hades, and then also an animal that is a correspondence of Hades, and then a place in the landscape that you can actually go to or see pictures of in now in today's time. And then there's an invitation to practice and different ways that you can practice with Hades in just in a variety of ways, and looking at the seasons, or doing a dedication ceremony, or doing a just doing regular journey work with Hades. And so it is, I really like how the chapters have that kind of, each one has different, of course, topics in it, but it has that kind of same regularity and the same structure for each chapter. And I really like that. And it goes the gamut um between very easy practices that anyone can do, to more difficult and more involved practices, so that if you found that you really wanted to work with Hades, then this would be a great way to do that. And so I did really enjoy the book. I think it is a really good book if you're interested in chthonic deities, underworld deities, working with the dead, working with the underworld, working in the shadow realm. If you like the story of Persephone, if you work with Persephone or Demeter at all in as goddesses, going that step further in their relationships, specifically Persephone's relationship, because of course she plays, a big part in this as Hades' wife. And so if you like that, then I think this is a really good book as well. And there's lots of practices that you can do working with the shadow, um, customs that you can do, and the ways that in ancient Greek, how the ways that the dead were really worked with, and how and different systems. And hold on, barking dog. But different customs and that come from, and she has done an excellent job in putting in reference material, and it's got an extensive bibliography that you can find more research in all of these correspondences, and all of the lore and the history and the stories of the Greek people when Hades would have been would have been worshipped or would have been part of that landscape. And so I think in it really ticks all the boxes. It really goes and talks about history very well, talks about witchcraft very well, talks about magic very well, talks about the ways that you can practice and different ways to identify with underworld and working in the underworld. And so I really did enjoy it. And bridging that gap between, we're not trying to recreate the past here. We're trying to take, what happened and what we know about it and how we can use that and make our own practice today. And so again, I think it would appeal to anyone in any stage of practice. If you're just just starting out and you really want to have some guidance about working with a deity specifically, this is good for that. And if you're more advanced in your practice and you want to, maybe you really want to start working with a specific god, and this gives you that kind of framework to do it in, using Hades and his mythology and, his guidance through the author. And so this is definitely a book that I would recommend. And I think that, let's see if there's anything in particular. One of the chapters, she talks about death and burial customs in ancient Greece. And so again, this is part of going back to the history and really getting a sense of what life was like at the time that Hades was part of the everyday culture. And the author in this chapter says, take a moment to think about this fact. We are only alive because of the dead. And and it's very true. And that's one of the things, and I highlighted that because I am a person that I have a really hard time during the winter when everything in starting in the fall, even though I love fall and I love, that time and the time of the witch. It's really hard because I know that things are dying, and things that, the leaves are falling from the trees, the plants and the flowers are disappearing, the crickets and the June bugs and the cicadas and things that just make music all summer, are starting to disappear, and butterflies and things are starting to hibernate and go underground. And and it's really hard, and I have a really hard time with the cold weather and things being just being barren, the landscape being barren. Even though, snow is beautiful, and there is some of the most beautiful light in the winter because of the short days, and the light is so beautiful. And I love being under a blanket and snuggling up. I still really have a hard time in the winter. And I'm so glad when it's spring again. And this time of year when things are growing here in the Northern Hemisphere, and things are growing, and everything is has leaves on it again, and there's grass and violets and dandelions and everything. And so, I love it. And there's a lot of times I think, oh, it would just be great if it were summer all the time. But then it can't be. It can't. Our we can't live without this cycle, because if we didn't have this renewal of the earth, this renewal of and things dying to enrich the soil and to, cover up the animals that are hibernating, and, and cover the ground when it does snow or when it's icy or anything like that. If we didn't have those things, then, life wouldn't go on. And so as much as I have a hard time with that time of the death, then I I know that it's important, and that it's my signal to go inward a little bit more. It's my signal to say, you need to take a rest. You just need to read a book and drink some tea, and it'll be summer again, and the enjoy the specific things about that time of year. And so we do need that time. And just like we need the the stories of Hades, and we need the stories of, and we need Persephone to be his queen and his wife half of the year, and then we need her to be up in the world the other half of the year. And so, like, we need these things. We need these cycles. We need the cycle of life and death. And eventually all of us are going to die as well. And sometimes, it's not a pleasant thought, and it's not something that we think about or talk about a lot, but it does happen. And it is. And here, if in the book, is that's, a big topic is death, and being able to talk to each other about it, and being able to share our grief and our sadness, and the way that it is grief, and it is something that it never changes, and it grows, and it, maybe ebbs and flows, but and one day, we'll know what's on the other side, and we'll be able to, to say that we did, had our life, and lived well. And so let's see. I think, oh, this is one of the other things that I had um, bookmarked, because I thought this was something that a lot of people may deal with, and having nightmares, and or having unwanted spirits. And so, in the book, the author says, due to its exceptional powers of purification, rosemary can also help guard against unwanted nightmares and ghosts. And rosemary is one of Hades' correspondences. So tuck a sprig of rosemary under your pillow or bed, or include it in a sachet with mugwort, hops, or lavender for easement of nightmares. And to discourage unwanted ghosts or spirits, burn rosemary in your home or other space, fumigating it by wafting the smoke of smoldering herb throughout each room. So that's some just a small bit, tiny bit of, and you can see what the rest of the book is like. And it has a lot of these very simple things that you can do, but two more complex things that you can do as well. All right, that is it for the book. And here it is again. Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion by Jamie Waggoner. And I will leave a link to this, and I'll also leave a link to the other videos that I have already done for this month. So the crystal, the smoky quartz, and the herb raspberry, and the deck, the Mystic Fairy Tarot. And so I have videos on the crystal and the herb, along with PDFs that you can find on my website, with all the information and the magic that I do with those two items, and then also the review of the Mystic Fairy Tarot that I worked with as well. All right, I think that is it. So this is the last one in May. I can't believe how fast this month has gone. And I am diligently working on, I already have all the things that I know I'm going to work with in June. And so I'm, getting everything together and putting everything, on the schedule so that I will have the videos out for you as well. And I will have that, all the information about those things in the next video, which will come out next week, the first week of June. All right. Thank you for being here, and hope you have a great rest of the day, and I will see you again soon. Bye.